Welcome, everybody. I hope we have a crowd here on Facebook Live for a conversation with a researcher who is not new to NAF, has known us for a long time. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Mark Lesser. I'm the Vice President for Research and Technology at NAF, and I'm really excited and proud to bring a huge talent in the space of research around all kinds of education reform, but especially in career and technical education. Dr. Jim Kemple is the Executive Director of the Research Alliance for New York City Schools and Research Professor at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at NYU. Dr. Kemple is particularly well known for his work examining high school reform, assessing performance trends in New York City's educational landscape, and designing rigorous impact evaluations. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know you are hunkered down upstate, and we're really grateful to have you here spending time.
It's great. Glad to be with you and glad to be reconnected with NAF.
Yeah. So what folks may not know is that in a former part of your career at the well-known research group MDRC, you had conducted some studies that involved NAF a little while back, and so this is kind of a nice reconnection. You're now a research professor at NYU, and I want to encourage everybody to check out the links below in Facebook. Our buddy and Facebook DJ today, Josedi from NAF, is dropping Jim's bio, and I want to encourage everybody to check it out. You have when I think of folks who, if I have CTE questions or education reform questions, who need to be on my list of sort of the top 3 folks who have been researching this space, I think of Jim Kemple, and so I feel really lucky to have you. And having done a little bit of background last night just to make sure our tech was working, we also realized that we happen to live about a town away from each other in the great state of New Jersey. So where I am broadcasting from today. So Jim, thanks again. I want to dig right into some work that the Research Alliance for New York City Schools has been doing that is extremely relevant to work, whether it's NAF's network or whatever context of CTE you might be working in. So New York City is a district of over 1 million students. And one of the really interesting pieces of research you guys have been doing is about the sort of trends over time on the supply side of CTE. What's being offered and to whom? And I'm curious to hear from you. What are the most significant changes on the supply side of CTE over the last, certainly that sort of key 10-year period up to 2017 that you studied very closely?
Sure, yeah, and again, it's great to be with you, Mark, and to the NAF community. So I guess the best way to start off is to think about New York City in some ways is really a bellwether or a really good barometer for trends across the country. And I think what we're seeing in New York City over the last 10 to 15 years is probably pretty closely paralleled in other school districts across the country. So I think of kind of 4 big picture trends that have occurred. One is a pretty significant increase in the offering of what are called career technical education programs of study. This is a term that the U.S. Department of Education and its Office of Career and Technical Education has coined to frame the offerings within a program that offers coursework in career areas, work-based learning, certain certified teachers, partnerships with local employers, articulation with post-secondary institutions. And New York City has seen a pretty precipitous increase in the offering of more and more programs of study over the last 10 to 15 years. A second major trend is a very clear focus and a major effort at ramping up its quality control and documentation of its CTE programs of study. This means collecting data on an annual basis about the offerings and the participation among students and teachers in career and technical education programs. It also means, holding them to standards that will allow them to progress toward getting a New York State certification as a CTE program of study. And interestingly, what that has also meant is that the New York City Department of Education has actually downsized the number of CTE programs it's offering, or at least that are on the rolls, through this quality control effort. Some of the elimination of programs of study have been simply sort of acknowledging that some of the programs that were on the books through the mid 2000s through 2012 probably were not all operating as real programs of study, and those were taken off the books. Others have really struggled to maintain the quality of their offerings, have been eliminated. Others have been strengthened by the quality control measures that the district has put in place. And I think that's also been true across the country. The third big trend, I think, is an increase in specific career cluster areas, and a slight decrease in some others. Most notably, what we've seen is a pretty significant increase in the offering of programs of study focused on technology and engineering, with slight decreases over the last 10 years in offerings in business and finance and in public service career areas. And part of that is sort of mapping the labor market and the focus in New York City, the growing focus in New York City in the tech industries and in engineering more broadly, or STEM more broadly. And so New York City really has become kind of one of the East Coast hubs for technology and STEM-related careers. And then finally, I think going along with this idea of quality control, the other big trend I think in CTE in New York City and across the country is thinking about those programs as not just preparing young people for the labor market, but really thinking clearly about the need to make sure that students are both college and career ready, and those having somewhat distinctively different meanings and different ways of being implemented in the programs of study across the city and across the state. So that has meant some tweaks to the curriculum, some modifications of how they adapt to the need to meet academic standards for the New York State Regents diploma, and so on. So let me leave it at that for now, and we'll probably come back to some of these issues as we go through the conversation.
Yeah, I'm curious. So this this graphic that I've been showing here on screen it demonstrates some of the description that you just gave around. We had this kind of on the supply side, there was this dip in 2015, and in the research that the Alliance did, a big piece of that was thinking about this dip in 2015 and where the ideas about quality changed, and also thinking about that difference between program of study and how CTE schools are sort of defined. It looks like the trajectory for the offerings is back on something of an incline. How important do you think it is that we carefully monitor that trajectory and continue to have quality be one of the sort of driving forces for how we grow CTE efforts in for those who are sort of reform driven and believing in the CTE realm?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that it's the absolutely essential ingredient in trying to think about how we improve the offerings around career and technical education in New York City and across the country. I think a really good indication of how important that is stems from some of the earlier work that we had done when I was at MDRC, where we did a big national, very rigorous study of the career academy model, of which NAF is a critical player and a critical promoter of a model that is not just exclusively career and technical education, but also brings in the importance of small learning communities and personalized learning, as well as the integration of academic and career-related learning opportunities for young people. And what we saw there was really strong evidence of very positive and persistent effects on the long-term outcomes for the young people who participated in the programs. Really, I think extraordinary and uniquely large effects on employment and earnings after students finished high school without compromising on their capacity to go to and complete college if they wanted to. But what that did was, I think, really stimulate a interest across the country in using the Career Academy model as the reform du jour. You could write a proposal to the federal government or your state government or to a foundation to get funding for a Career Academy, and then cite all this great evidence about how effective they were. My sense is that in many cases, not all cases certainly, but what happened in many cases was that people were using that Career Academy name largely in name only, without attending to the important and critical features of the quality of the work-based learning offerings, ensuring that they had the strong personalized learning and small learning community principles, as well as the effort to try to integrate academic and career-related course taking. So I think, and I think what we saw is really in some ways a diluting of the potential effect of career academies because people were really using that as the sort of the brand name rather than the core principles that you were supposed to do. And I think places like NAF have really been, and the National Academy Coalition, the National Career Academy Coalition, and the College and Career Academy Support Network as some of the mainstays in trying to ensure that there are agreed upon programs, practices that are common across all career academies, ways of monitoring the quality of those program elements, and providing the technical supports that ensure the highest quality program. So I think that's the key to all of this. I think it makes no sense to continue to expand offerings without ensuring that they meet some standard for the ingredients that make them effective.
Yeah, I think it's I guess it's not surprising that in education we suffer from this, in a moment where we're talking a lot about epidemic and pandemic, and I guess it's not surprising that as a field, like most fields, we suffer a little bit from the du jour syndrome, right? Where it's like, I heard somebody recently at a conference making a presentation saying, if you're not talking about STEM, for example, you're hellbound. And I think that some of the CTE models, STEM driven models, and on, we often suffer from the remedy du jour. And I think that what's so important about some of the research that Research Alliance and other great, whether it's R1 researchers at post-secondary institutions, or if organizations can afford to do research on their own, that we're doing, is trying to figure out some of these factors that are the real impacting factors about those environments. When we talk about whether it's small school culture or open enrollment as a feature, these things really need to be looked at over time. And so thank goodness we're doing some of that work and digging deeply. I want to use a quick pause as a reminder to let people know to drop questions into the Facebook chat below, and let us know whether it's while we're live right now, or feel free to drop questions as we go. And even if you're watching this recorded, we will. I am a part of this group, and we'll try to get you answers on some of this stuff. So, Jim, what have we learned as a field so far about the who of CTE and how it's changed over time? Right. So lots of districts in the U.S. where CTE high schools are now the most competitive academically to get into. Right. I have friends who are teaching in CTE environments and are saying, they're sending more kids to Ivy League post-secondary experiences than other public schools surrounding them. If we look at the last decade or so, who is your research finding sees themselves as CTE, And what are you noticing about how that's changing?
Yeah, so I think among the trends, I think is number one, and again, I think New York City serves as a really good example of what's going on nationally. Is that the CTE offerings are becoming incredibly diversified. Diversified not just in the kinds of career areas that they focus on, not just the quality of the programs, but I think in the student populations that they're trying to attract and serve. So in New York City, for example, while many of the programs are incredibly competitive in the sense that they use admissions criteria around prior achievement or student grades or attendance or referrals from teachers, so that they really are becoming among the really highly sought after screened options for students in high school. And there's a huge swath of programs available across New York City that have that kind of selective criteria. But there are also a range of options that include sort of unscreened, where students who live close in the neighborhood or who want an option for career and technical education can apply. And there are really no screens on those. But I think at the same time, whether it's a screen program using academic criteria for admission or an open enrollment kind of arrangement, there are still the same commitments to quality in terms of the course offerings, the work-based learning opportunities for young people. So I think that's what matters most, it seems to me, is the quality of the program, not its admissions criteria. Massachusetts, for example, has really been involved in, I think, some very deep controversy about its admissions policy for some of its career and technical education schools, to the point where they're excluding large numbers of Black, Latino, low-income students under the guise of some of their admissions criteria. And I think that's depriving some students who are likely to benefit tremendously from programs from being able to attend because of the admissions criteria. I think it's the quality of the programs that seem to me far more important in terms of ensuring that they produce the kinds of effects, whether it's access to a very high-end post-secondary education opportunity, or access to the labor market, or some combination of the two when young people are finishing high schools. But I think, again, like New York City, most of the rest of the country has seen a real diversification of both the kinds of programs that are offered, but also the ability to attract a diverse student population. I think that some of the real questions are whether or not the effort to use performance-based screening criteria puts certain students at a disadvantage for the opportunity to benefit from a high-quality program, when they're just as likely, when the academic requirements are not necessarily those prior characteristics that will predict their success in high school. I think it's going to, the program should be a little bit more open to enrolling students and providing them with those benefits in some ways, to a certain extent, regardless of their prior achievement.
Yeah. I wonder, so if you look at flashing some of the charts from recent research from the Alliance, just to show people a sense of what's available, and Joe Sadie from our team will drop some links in the Facebook chat so that people can dig into that even further. There's some really important data there. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, there's an uptick rather in New York City for particularly students of color as it relates to opting into STEM-focused schools. And I think it tempts optimism if part of the goal for our work as educators and a sector is to help these industries better reflect humanity, better reflect the communities where that are not only using these products, but also generating these products. In your view as a researcher, I wonder, now with the trend lines sort of moving in the right direction on things like that, what kinds of partnership do you think with practitioners are the most vital, so that we don't squander, that interest of students and the engagement of families in this space? Because we're not yet at a place where that uptick in, interest around things like STEM is also, translating to what kind of industry we aspire to. So what do you think the right sort of place to focus is right now?
Well, that's a really, really difficult question. I think all of our answers to questions like that 6 or 7 weeks ago are probably quite different now. And so it's a little difficult to answer that when you talk about like currently or today. But I think there are probably some real challenges that lie in front of CTE programs, and particularly those in the STEM fields that are sort of transcendent, sort of beyond the current crisis. But I also think that there are some challenges that the new environment is going to present. So I think the first question that always confronts CTE programs, and particularly in the STEM areas, it really has to do with access to high quality work-based learning opportunities for young people. This is going to be even more difficult moving over the next 6 to 8 months, depending on how the economy tries to recover from the shutdown. But I think, oftentimes what we find are that employers who serve as partners to the schools and to the career and technical education programs think of their role in providing work-based learning opportunities as philanthropic or as altruistic. They're trying to provide a service to the community and to the students who live in the city or in the district. What that means often is when they're confronted with economic challenges like they are now or like they have in prior recessions, that may be one of the first things that goes. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon a combination of those who work in the labor side of the economy to collaborate as best as possible with folks on the education side of our service and economy to figure out the best ways of collaborating to ensure that young people get access to opportunities to learn about the world of work in a real setting, in an authentic setting, as best they can. And again, I think this has got to be a connection between at the federal level between the Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Education, just like was done in the early 1990s around the School to Work Opportunities Act. But even at the local level, the employer sector and the education sectors have to continue to work together to find good, strong opportunities for young people. I also think that it will be incumbent upon both educators and employers to keep thinking about this preparation for both post-secondary education and post-secondary work. I think there's wide agreement now that a high school diploma, regardless of what our standards are, is no longer sufficient as a terminal degree. Whether people go immediately to a college, whether it's 2-year or 4-year, or delay that in favor of some work for a while and then going to college or combining school and work, we have to keep young people oriented toward post-secondary credentials that will advance their learning. And then finally, I think while it's important to think about the specific cluster or career focus of either a CTE program or the employer partnerships, it's really important to keep in mind that what young people are most often going to benefit from is not necessarily being able to be employed as an engineer or as an X-ray technician or a childcare provider, but they're learning about this set of skills that are required across sectors. Showing up for work on time, how to conduct yourself and be responsive to supervisors, and how to sort of build a career trajectory from one job to the next. These kind of navigational tools that I think places like NAF have been particularly effective over and above whether students are ending up in the same career area as their original high school experience.
Yeah, there's that's a whole track I want to have you back and have a whole conversation about. There's been some good reporting out there, I think, looking at post-secondary and beyond, sort of wage earnings data related to, a degree that's CTE related versus a degree that's humanities related, and that's a whole conversation that I want to have you back to have, because I think that in this moment that we're in, man, we have a lot of things to rethink in terms of what does a 2-year degree look like? What does a 4-year degree look like? And what is, in that sort of intentional spring between the soft skills and hard skills that a lot of people think are the tickets. How do we find balance, and how do we educate families to know, that when they're sending their, maybe they see CTE as the right pathway for their young person, and but to realize that it is not soft skills alone that longer term, hard skills alone that longer term is going to land them, more satisfaction in terms of how enriching a career is going to be for themselves and their families. That's a whole area I want to get into with you. So here's a question I wanted to ask you, just relevant to the moment that we're in, and we just have a few minutes left. I also want to encourage people to ask questions on Facebook. I actually have access to high quality work-based learning is a huge challenge, especially in this times where layoffs are happening. It's a super relevant point. I wonder, actually related to that question, there's a dearth of work-based learning opportunities, especially at a time when professionals in some of these areas are so busy. I wonder what you think about the coming years as it relates to COVID-19. Do you imagine, so there's one vision in my head that is a future where there's sort of a Sputnik moon race-like effect on health sciences in the coming years. And, a lot of students sort of rushing to health science CTE pathways. And then I could see it going the other way. I wonder what your prediction is. Do you think this is going to turn young people off from health sciences, or do you think we have a chance to grow a part of our workforce that's needed here?
I think that's a good question. I think it's very hard to predict at this early stage. I bet a lot of it will have to do with the degree to which there is a supply of opportunities for young people to engage in work-based learning opportunities as they go through high school in whatever field it might be. And if there does happen to be an expansion of both the healthcare industry in general and the opportunity for the providers of healthcare services to serve as work-based learning placements for young people, I think young people will gravitate toward that opportunity. And I think, again, it will be just as important for young people to be learning about the specifics of jobs in the healthcare industry, which is incredibly diverse. I don't think the healthcare industry is exempt from it needing really careful attention to technology and engineering, business and finance. I think the healthcare sector is one of those that really crosses through so many of the different career clusters that are offered through CTE that it'll depend a lot on the degree to which that sector as an employment sector expands over the next few years, either in response to the COVID-19 or the expansion of healthcare services. I mean, if we end up with a universal healthcare system where we are able to provide services for everyone who needs them, that may very well create more demand for those kinds of jobs. I also think another driving force in the coming years will just be the nature of work itself. So to the degree that we move to more remote work and remote employment, either by virtue of what we've learned from the COVID crisis or in response to the second or third wave of the virus, or just as a way of doing business where there may be some efficiencies and some advantages of working remotely, what can employers do and how can schools facilitate the opportunity for young people to engage in internships or apprenticeships or other kinds of work-based learning experience in a virtual way? We're already starting to see some very creative ways that intermediary partners across New York City are trying to develop virtual or remote internship opportunities for young people. They're still in the planning stages. We'll see how these play out and whether students are able to actually participate. But I think that'll be another important factor, not just to the healthcare industry, but to sort of across the board to the offerings that are made available through CTE. Mark, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yep.
Good. Okay. So, question from a Facebook user. Sorry. Can you speak to why I was showing earlier the slide of how things went from, it was around 2015 that the dip happened, and somebody is curious about why the trend line goes in that direction for New York City schools. I want to keep everyone to keep in mind that this research is specifically about CTE as it exists in the 1.1 million student district of New York City. So this is not national. This is local. But can you explain that one sort of downtrend?
Yeah. So from the best that we can tell, and this is based both on the quantitative data we've looked at and our interviews with folks at the New York City Department of Education. But the best that we can tell, this is largely due to a range of quality control measures that the district was undertaking between about 2012 and 2015, where they were more systematically collecting data on their programs. They were using that data to make decisions about the viability of their programs, the quality of those programs, and then went through an exercise of taking programs off the books, some of which had very, very few students enrolled in them, some of which were really providing very limited access to the opportunities or to the full range of opportunities that CTE was supposed to be providing in New York City. And so that downturn, I think, was sort of an across-the-board effort to really take a careful look at the characteristics and quality of the programs that were being offered, and then to take some of those off the books as sort of non-viable opportunities. I think, in fact, the tech sector, the tech cluster area, tech and engineering, actually increased over time. Between 2009 and 2019. So despite the fact that there was this overall decline in program offerings across the board, the tech sector actually went up. And the things that did decline were, I think, just slightly business and finance and the public sector career areas. So I think those were the two areas where there was a slight decrease, but not a systematic effort on the Department of Education or the employers to say, we will do this, but not that. I think it was really much more a quality control question.
Yep. I'm going to bring this one back up for a second. I'm still getting used to, there we go. One of the things that I noticed from this research is also regarding trend lines and sort of what's being offered is that some of the competency pathways around things like food and resources, thinking about agriculture and ecology. As I was doing some homework for this conversation, I was also noticing in the background of my news feed, I was also hearing that they just announced a record lows in greenhouse gases for this year as it relates to this COVID quarantine. And one of the key questions that I have for CTE research moving forward is whether and how we have more schools who can rise to the occasion of figuring out how we engage young people to start looking at those trends and make sure that when we get around to putting the kind of workforce we need on those problems, that we're really feeding them the way that they need to be. So that one came up for me overnight as I was hearing that news come in.
Yeah, and again, I think most of that is going to really come down to the supply of employers who can provide young people with those learning opportunities in a work-based setting. And I think, the green technologies are really sort of embedded in some of those, what we call technology and engineering career areas. New York City is a challenging place to do agriculture, but it's not like there's nothing going on. But I think you have a good point there, and those may very well be industries that expand pretty significantly over the years. And I think those are areas where they could present young people with learning opportunities. And again, I think it's just as important to think about what they learn, not just about that particular career area and the skills that are necessary there, but about sort of what are the other skills you need as an employee in any industry. And sometimes it's just as valuable to learn what you don't want to do as it is to learn about what you do want to do.
Amen. Yep. Jim, I'm going to let you go in just a minute. I want to ask the last question, which I want to sort of ask. I want to figure out how we can together ask as many research professionals like yourself and your team as possible, that NAF as an organization can do our part to be asking this question openly and figuring out how to publicize the question. The question is, what do you think will be the highest priority research question that work-based learning pathways need to consider by the time a current high school freshman graduates college? So what do you think the key question, particularly as it relates to sort of career-connected learning, whether we call it CTE or otherwise, what's the key question we have to ask in the next 8 to 10 years?
So, well, the question of do they make a difference in young people's lives is the most important question. I feel like we're starting to get a pretty good handle on that. I think most of the evidence around work-based learning is becoming more and more consistent, that it provides long-term benefits, particularly to young people's engagement in the labor market and their earnings trajectories over a long period of time after they finish high school. So I think the real questions from a research standpoint are going to be around the implementation and the processes by which we do a good job of facilitating high-quality work-based learning opportunities. I think there are 3 pieces of that. One is better understanding and shedding light on the incentives and the basis for employer investments in work-based learning and in collaborations with schools that provide young people with high-quality learning opportunities. Second, I think on the school side, how can we make sure that schools have the resources for adults who are going to take responsibility, be the people who have to wake up every day worrying about how best to coordinate the relationships with local employers, with opportunities for young people to learn outside the school building and sort of outside the classroom. That's an essential position in creating a high quality CTE program or a high quality work-based learning or pathway programs, the school-based coordination. And thirdly, sort of how do we then try to take more advantage of virtual work-based learning opportunities? I think the current 9th graders are going through an extraordinary and potentially transformative experience in the way that learning takes place. And I think one of the key questions for research is, what are we learning from that? How do we promote the best of that and try to make sure we don't replicate the worst of it?
Jim, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. If you'll have it, I want to have you back on to have about 60 other conversations on some of this stuff, because I learn a little bit more each time we get to talk, and I think the network at NAF certainly gains a ton from the perspective. So I can't thank you enough.
Glad to do it. And, as you and I were talking yesterday, I really think a highlight of my career over the last 35 plus years has been my connection with the Career Academy community across the country, including NAF, the Career Academy support network at Berkeley, and the National Career Academy Coalition, the Philadelphia Academies, Inc. That community of young people, of support organizations, has really been among the most important and models for organizational learning, for paying close attention to evidence, an appetite for building evidence and using evidence to improve the quality of its programs. And so I'm delighted to spend a little more time with you all.
Really appreciate it. Dr. Jim Kemple from NYC Really grateful. I want to encourage everybody, for anyone who I missed at the top of this broadcast, my name is Mark Lesser. I'm the Vice President for Research and Technology at NAF. We're grateful for everyone joining, whether you're watching this live or as a recording. Please do drop your questions in the chat below, and we'll keep track of it for a few weeks at least, and try to get you answers to any of your questions. Also, check links in the stream below this conversation for some of the research coming out of the Research Alliance for New York City Schools, as well as links to others of their studies that have come out. Please encourage your colleagues. If you are at a NAF Academy and you're enjoying this broadcast, encourage colleagues to come and join the NAF Educators Group. We are grateful to have you here, and we at NAF are wishing you calm, courage, and hopefully finding some laughter in these very difficult days. Thanks again, everyone, and hope to talk to you again very soon.